Good afternoon. I'm Ward 1 Council Member Brianne Nadeau, the Chair of the Committee on Human Services. Today is Thursday, September 22nd, 2022, and we are holding this hearing using the Zoom online platform. The time is 1:03 p.m. Today we'll be receiving public and government testimony on two bills intended to improve the way the district's child welfare system serves youth and families. The first bill under consideration today is Bill 24-0857, the Preserving Our Kids' Equity Through Trusts Amendment Act of 2022, also known as the Pocket Act. 10% of American foster children are entitled to Social Security benefits either because their parents have died or because they have a physical or mental disability. This money, typically more than $700 per month, is their property under federal law. Currently, however, the district is one of 37 jurisdictions in which child welfare agencies identify orphaned and disabled children in care, apply for benefits on their behalf, and then use the benefits to pay for the costs of care. That's money current and former foster youth could badly use. At age 21, more than a quarter of district youth who spend time in foster care report having experienced homelessness. A third report receiving public assistance, and only a third report being enrolled in school. Fewer than half report being employed. In light of those outcomes, giving former foster youth the resources they need to pay the bills, get to work, and transition to independence is a matter of justice. Because so many youth are already eligible for benefits, however, we already have the tools to make that justice a reality. We just have to stop taking children's money. And to help as many children as possible, to connect as many youth with benefits as possible, we have to draw down as much federal money as possible. That's why on June 14th, I was proud to introduce the Pocket Act with the support of 7 of my colleagues. This issue was first brought to my attention by former foster youth and current foster parents. I was proud to work with them, with local advocates, with several nationally recognized experts, and with CFSA, the Child and Family Services Agency, to develop a solution that meets children's needs. The Pocket Act requires CFSA to screen youth who enter care for benefits and to conserve children's benefits in accounts that keep youth eligible to continue to receive them. It also ensures that youth will not get a bill for overpayment when they leave foster care by requiring the agency either to appeal notices of overpayment or to cover overpayment bills themselves. Additionally, this legislation addresses several administrative challenges with CFA's Kinship Caregiver Subsidy Program, which are 100% effective at keeping children out of foster care. It clarifies when benefits start to accrue, makes the close relative caregiver program permanent, and implements a few other technical fixes to ensure that these programs run smoothly. I'd like to thank CFSA, Children's Law Center, Amy Hartfield of the University of San Diego, and Daniel Hatcher of the University of Baltimore for devoting hours to supporting my team's work on this critical legislation. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about how we can continue to improve it. The second piece of legislation under consideration today is Bill 24-0941, the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Amendment Act of 2022. Although a quarter of district youth leaving foster care experience homelessness, only one has reported planning on living in their own apartment in the past 2 fiscal years. Luckily, just like with Social Security benefits, we already have the tools we need to improve outcomes for youth aging out of care. That's why on June 14th, I introduced this legislation with the support of 5 of my colleagues to end homelessness for former foster youth. Under the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Foster Youth to Independence Initiative, public housing authorities can draw down non-competitive family unification program, or FUP, housing choice vouchers for youth leaving care on an as-needed basis. And under the recent Fostering Stable Housing Opportunity Amendments, youth voucher recipients who participate in HUD's Family Self-Sufficiency Program are eligible for 5 years of federal housing support. That means that the district can draw down at least 25 vouchers for youth aging out of care every year. Those vouchers can last 5 years, and in conjunction with competitive voucher allocations, functionally end homelessness for youth aging out of care. This legislation would require CFSA to do its part to draw down those vouchers for every youth aging out of care who is at risk of homelessness and who needs assistance securing a primary residence for independent living. In doing so, this legislation empowers the district to use federal dollars to put youth on a path to independence, rather than using local dollars to refer them into the homelessness continuum of care. I'd like to thank Ruth Ann White of the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare for supporting my office in navigating the challenging world of voucher administration and for ongoing passionate advocacy on behalf of district youth. I'd also like to thank ANC 8C Chair Salima Dofo for activating the community on the critical issue of housing for older youth. The committee has received approximately 100 letters from district residents committed to ending homelessness for this vulnerable population, and I am awed and honored by the compassion and commitment to justice shown by so many residents. And I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about how we can best serve youth aging out of care. I'd now like to provide some logistical announcements for today's hearing. In addition to Zoom, this hearing is being broadcast live on my website at brianneknadeau.com/live, as well as YouTube. I would also like to provide some detailed reminders about the Zoom platform and the committee protocols for the witnesses participating today. All witnesses participating in this webinar are currently listed as attendees in Zoom. This means your microphones are muted and your video cameras are turned off. When it's your turn to join a panel for testimony, I will call your name. A member of my staff will change your status to a panelist, at which point you'll need to accept the invitation to join the panel. If you wish to activate your video while you testify, you'll need to click the button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen that looks like a video camera. Please remain muted until it is your turn to testify. Representatives of organizations will be allowed 5 minutes to testify, and public witnesses representing themselves will be allowed a total of 3 minutes. When your time is up, I kindly ask that you conclude your remarks so that we can ensure that everyone has a chance to be heard. We will be calling witnesses up in panels of 4, and council members will have up to 10 minutes to ask questions of each panel. For any technical difficulties, send a message to the host labeled as the Committee on Human Services, or if you're having trouble gaining access to the Zoom, call us at 202-834-8091. Okay, with that, let's turn to our first panel of witnesses. Tammy Weerasinga-Cody, Supervising Policy Attorney at Children's Law Center. Marja Plater, John E. Nolan Youth Justice Counsel at the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs. Ruth Ann White, Executive Director of the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. And Tony Reynolds Kreiner. When you are ready, you may begin.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Nadeau and members of the Committee on Human Services. My name is Tammy Weerasinga-Cody. I am the Supervising Policy Attorney at Children's Law Center and a resident of the district. I am testifying today on behalf of Children's Law Center, which fights so every DC child can grow up with a stable family, good health, and quality education. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today regarding the Preserving Our Kids' Equity Through Trust Amendment Act of 2022, the Pocket Act, and the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Amendment Act of 2022, the FSHO Act. We are very grateful to Chairperson Nadeau for taking action and calling attention to the crucial issues addressed by these proposed bills. Children's Law Center is supportive of the goals of both bills before the committee today and would be very pleased to see the council take effective action in these areas. Youth aging out of foster care face significant challenges transitioning into independent living. Among other issues, these challenges often include finding employment, securing housing, and paying rent and transportation. The FUP Housing Voucher Program offers a potential solution to a frequent challenge older foster youth experience, securing stable housing upon exiting care. Our clients, however, have often struggled to access FUP vouchers. The reasons why are unclear, though it appears obstacles exist at various points along the pipeline, from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development to DC's Housing Authority to CFSA itself. We need more information to understand how DC's foster youth can more consistently access and utilize FUP vouchers. To this end, we would like to see the FSHO Act include requirements for CFSA to increase transparency into the relevant policies, practices, and procedures around FUP, so that older foster youth and their advocates can ensure they are able to access this resource when applicable, and the agency and the council can take steps to remove any obstacles to eligible youth accessing this resource. With respect to the Pocket Act, Children's Law Center is fully supportive of efforts to improve access to long-term Social Security benefits for eligible DC children and families, and to provide older youth aging out of foster care with direct financial supports. Whenever a child leaves CFSA's care, whether they are reunifying with their parents, achieving permanency with another caregiver through adoption or guardianship, or aging out, providing additional financial resources to that child helps ensure their stability and long-term success. For children reunifying with their parents, poverty is such a significant stress factor on families, and financial resources can make all the difference in preventing the conditions that can lead to neglect. For children achieving permanency with another caregiver, the same concept applies. Making sure families have the financial means to meet the needs of their children is crucial to achieving stability and maintaining permanency. For youth aging out of care, both the connection with federal SSA benefits and the nest egg mandated by the proposed legislation could be particularly life-changing. Far too many of our clients age out of foster care into instability and insecurity. Because they are often completely on their own without supportive adults in their lives, these youth are also often living on the edge, where one stroke of bad luck, an unexpected car repair, a relative or friend saying they can't sleep on their couch anymore, or a medical emergency can push them into poverty and homelessness. For the subset of these youth who are eligible for federal SSA benefits, the nest egg created by the Pocket Act could provide them with a much-needed financial cushion. These funds could cover unexpected costs and help them obtain housing, education, and employment opportunities that would otherwise be out of reach. Further, for those youth who qualify for federal SSA benefits as adults, being connected with these benefits while in care is crucial. Without CFSA's support and expertise, it is very challenging for these youth to successfully navigate the application process and obtain these benefits on their own. Although the proposed legislation has the potential to provide much-needed financial supports for children, youth, and families involved in the child welfare system, careful attention must be paid to ensure this legislation is adequately funded and equipped with the right resources for it to have its intended impact. In particular, the council and the agency must thoroughly understand the financial impact of the proposed bill's mandates and ensure funding for care and services for children in foster care is not unintentionally reduced as a result of this legislation. Further, for these federal funds to have the impact we want on DC's children and families, the CFSA staff responsible for implementing this legislation must be able to navigate the complex application, appeal, and recertification procedures, develop a thorough understanding of how to accumulate funds for children in care without triggering income or asset limits for other local or federal benefit programs, and provide ongoing education, training, and counseling for youth and families as they take over as direct beneficiaries and representative payees. Successfully executing these tasks will require thoughtfully designing and funding a program supported by staff with the right knowledge and experience. There is additional recommendations and details in my written testimony. I thank the committee for allowing me to testify today. I welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. We will now hear from Marcia Platter. Plater, I'm sorry.
Yes. Good afternoon, Chairperson Nadeau and members of the committee. My name is Marcia Plater, and I'm the Youth Justice Counsel with the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs. Thank you for this opportunity to testify in support of both of these bills today, the Preserving Our Kids' Equity Through Trust Amendment Act and the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Amendment Act. The Washington Lawyers Committee works to eradicate discrimination and systemic racial injustice through policy advocacy and litigation here in DC. And we're also a member of the Youth Economic Justice and Housing Coalition. And that coalition works to prevent and eradicate youth homelessness and improve the outcomes and experiences of youth and families experiencing homelessness in the district. As you're well aware, in DC and nationwide, Black and Brown young people are disproportionately represented in the child welfare system. And young people involved in this system often experience many hardships, including financial, when transitioning to independence as an adult in particular. The Washington Lawyers Committee and the Youth Economic Justice and Housing Coalition support these bills, and if passed, these bills are an important step towards ensuring that young people in the district's care can achieve financial and housing stability. Young people transitioning out of foster care face particular challenges. They're more likely to experience mental and physical health issues, housing instability, difficulties maintaining employment, furthering their education, early parenthood, and even involvement in other systems like the criminal legal system. And in DC in particular, at age 21, roughly only half of young people who transitioned out of care were employed, and around 44% had experienced homelessness in the past 2 years. Because of the overall inequities in the child welfare system, young people of color are at higher risk of experiencing these challenges. Ensuring that young people transitioning out of care in DC can financially support themselves should be a priority, and the Pocket Amendment Act is an essential part of working towards this goal. As you've already noted, 10% of young people in foster care are eligible for Social Security benefits, and these monthly benefits can accumulate to several $1,000s throughout a period in foster care. And even though these benefits legally belong to young people, CFSA is receiving these benefits on their behalf to cover costs of youth in care that CFSA is already funded for and is mandated by law to provide. And when CFSA takes these benefits, they're actually depriving these young people of funds that they could be using to support themselves. Only a few states and local jurisdictions have proposed or passed legislation to allow young people to get some portion, if not all, of their benefits. And we applaud Chairperson Nadeau and the committee for being at the forefront of this emerging issue and proposing this Amendment Act. The federal legislation that was introduced in the House did not pass, which makes passing the state level legislation even more urgent. And we urge the DC Council to pass the Pocket Amendment Act. For young people transitioning out of care, financial instability really goes hand in hand with housing instability. And we believe that the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act, if passed, can provide crucial housing assistance for these young people. In DC, roughly 23% of youth experiencing homelessness report prior involvement with the child welfare system, and 87% report challenges with housing immediately after exiting care. And this is all while DC is in the midst of an affordable housing crisis, largely spurred by rapid gentrification over the past few decades. From my personal experience representing young people in foster care in Maryland, I witnessed young people facing many of these very challenges. And I'm certain that young people in DC also experience these challenges. And their main concern is finding a place to stay and call a permanent home and figuring out a way to pay for it. Essentially, the proposed legislation would require CFSA to take full advantage of the expansion of the recent federal laws in the HUD's Fostering Youth to Independence Initiative programs. And this expanded access would provide crucial housing assistance for young people involved in the foster care system, and hopefully bridge that gap when they are transitioning to independence and decrease homelessness for these young folks. I did submit written testimony, and I'm noting that time is running short, but just in sum, young people in foster care system, especially young people of color, are one of the most vulnerable populations in DC. The district's responsibility to provide for young people in their care extends to affirmative steps to prepare them for transitioning to adulthood and becoming self-supporting. The proposed legislation sets out to do just that, and we're in support of both. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I did submit written testimony that goes into further detail as well. So thank you for the opportunity today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being mindful of the time. I appreciate that. Ruth Ann White.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Ruth White. I'm co-founder and executive director of the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. My organization worked with current and former foster youth from Action, Ohio to identify and eliminate the gaps between public systems through which youth unnecessarily fall into homelessness and human trafficking. Together, we designed the on-demand distribution mechanism for HUD's Family Unification Program. This program is often referred to as the Foster Youth to Independence Program. This provides housing vouchers for emancipating youth who are working, going to school, or who otherwise would benefit from a 5-year permanent housing subsidy in an apartment of their choice. My organization also co-authored, along with youth, the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act of 2019, which codifies what was a secretarial initiative into federal law. While writing the bill, we learned directly from foster youth and increasingly from the child welfare epistemic community that economic self-sufficiency is paramount. As such, it is my honor to testify in support of the Pocket Act and the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act of 2022. I would like to offer my deep gratitude to you for introducing these bills in tandem. Together, these bills provide invaluable support for CFSA's efforts to move youth towards economic independence, and it serves as an important reminder to child welfare advocates that protecting and advancing economic security must be a central feature of child welfare work. I use the word remind advisedly. Many advocates are unaware that the original name of the Social Security Act of 1935 was the Economic Security Act. The Pocket Act provides CFSA with new tools to bolster the economic security of youth and better aligns current practice with the original intent of the Roosevelt administration and its signature New Deal achievement. I understand that CFSA is concerned that it does not have the expertise on staff to take a portion of the funds that have been drawn down in the name of foster youth and place those funds into a variety of accounts to help youth build wealth prior to emancipation. I would like to point out that the District of Columbia has been under the obligation to employ, quote, experts, assistants, clerks, and other persons in the District of Columbia and elsewhere to meet the complex financial claiming and reporting requirements under the Social Security Act since June 30th of 1936. The Pocket Act, in order to be implemented, must have the full support of the council to make sure that DC does have the right staff in CFSA to do that claiming, but they certainly should be doing it. I would also like to offer my support for the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Amendment Act. I spoke about the need for this legislation at length during my testimony on February 17, 2022. My remarks are informed by current and former foster youth in DC some of whom are currently homeless, yet they're working full-time. This bill simply reinforces CFSA's efforts to tap available federal resources through their existing local level partnership with their sister agency, the District of Columbia Housing Authority. I want to emphasize that they do not need a new MOU to draw down on-demand vouchers through FYI. Their current MOU will suffice. Also, just a quick correction to the chairwoman, they can draw down 50 vouchers per year through the non-competitive, and they could draw down 75 vouchers through the competitive notice. We convene youth on a regular basis every Tuesday to talk about issues that they faced upon emancipation. And universally, they described they were denied a Section 8 housing choice voucher through FUP and instead diverted to one of two options. Either they were sent to rapid rehousing, which is an 18-month program that penalizes them as soon as they get a job, or they were sent to Wayne Place. Youth are not opposed to places like Wayne Place where they can learn to be good renters, but they would like to see that expanded throughout the wards. Wayne Place is, of course, in Ward 8. And finally, in closing, we think that Mayor Bowser should work directly with CFSA on a robust landlord recruitment campaign, because these developers coming into town need to play an important role in opening up spaces of opportunity to youth. And in return, the DC CFSA alumni are going to be great renters and great neighborhoods. We owe this to these kids. They were not only raised in DC, these youth were raised by the District of Columbia. And together we can easily tap federal resources to completely eliminate homelessness for all youth aging out of foster care. And with that, I'm happy to remain and take questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we will have questions for you, but first we will have Tony Reynolds Kreiner.
Good afternoon. Greetings to Chairperson Ado and the members of the Committee on Human Services. I am Tony Reynolds Kreiner, and I served as the 2019 to 2022 DC Congressional Foster Care Delegate appointed by Congresswoman Karen Bass and the National Foster Youth Institute. I'm a proud resident of Ward 7 and advocate for youth across the district. Thank you for the opportunity to show my support and speak with you today about the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Amendment Act of 2022. As a foster youth advocate and former public school administrator, I have met youth who are in the care of DC who have often shared concerns about their housing challenges. Many of the youth express not feeling prepared to age out of the system without a place to call home, minimal support, or real life skills. In 2019, I met a student who I deemed extremely gifted and a promising future. This student knew he wanted to build a better life for himself and his siblings, who were also a part of the system, but didn't have a Ms. Kreiner to help them navigate the CFSA or DC government programs to help him meet his goals. At the age of 20, this student accomplished a milestone by graduating with his high school diploma, but had so much fear about what was next for him. I met with his CFSA workers, educational specialists, and those who were charged with supporting him and his transition to adulthood. But we were often met with an unknown answer as to what his housing situation would be upon aging out. The social workers begged me to consider adopting my then student. As a former foster youth myself, I knew that there were other opportunities, that he could consider for his housing situation upon aging out. The social workers begged me to reconsider adopting my then student. And as a former foster youth myself, I knew that there were other opportunities such as continuing his education. I knew the district would pay for him to receive an education, which meant a housing option. But he had no clear understanding of his options before his 20th birthday. Unfortunately, that was the only opportunity he was able to quickly take advantage of. Today, this student attends UDC and is struggling to make ends meet. And if this student fails in college, he will have to forfeit his only housing option. And we want him to continue to thrive in his education and college as Mr. UDCC and not worry about housing barriers, food resources, or funds that he is eligible for that will aid in his day-to-day living. I therefore encourage the Council of the District of Columbia to pass Bill 24-0941, the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Amendment Act of 2022, with the following recommendations. 1, to strengthen the data collection process by putting indicators in the out processing exit debrief. Appoint a housing liaison or advocate to explain options before the year of aging out. Create a follow-up, contract, and engagement process for youth who are newly exiting the program, especially those who out-process to enter college dorms. 4 is to provide foster parents resources and materials to empower youth in the decision-making process for housing. And finally, to increase the age limit from 23 up to the age of 26 for youth enrolled in the Education and Training Voucher Program, the ETV program, who are graduating from DC Public Schools and DC Public Charter Schools. Thank you so much for your time, and I will stick around for any questions.
Thank you all for your testimony. And I know we have some written testimony that goes in at greater length that we will reference and include in the record. I specifically had some questions for Ruth Ann White, and if anybody else wants to chime in, that is perfectly fine. Ruth Ann, in its testimony, CFSA says to us the following: until CFSA has utilized, meaning leased and not just recommended youth or deemed eligible, 90% of our current allocation of FUP vouchers, DC Housing Authority will not qualify to apply for competitive or non-competitive FUP FYI vouchers from HUD. Is that accurate, and if why not?
DC has to have a 90% utilization rate for their existing family unification program portfolio. So that is accurate, but I'd be hard pressed to believe that they have something like 60 to 80 vouchers that have not been used. The other thing is if someone doesn't use that, they can't lease up. They only get 120 days to do that. So many of those vouchers would have gone back into the pool anyway if they weren't leased up. So I would just like to kind of emphasize what some of your other panelists have said. We just need transparency around that. But I just also want to point out, I'm aware of 2 youth right now that need these vouchers, and I know they have at least 2 vouchers available. So, yeah.
Okay, and we can follow up with you and the youth and CFSA after this. CFSA notes in its testimony that most youth between ages 18 and 29 live with one or both parents. In your experience working with foster youth, do most who age out and move back in with family do so because they want to or because they have to?
Well, about 40% of youth who age out of foster care are in contact with their biological parents. but it's often not possible for them to live there. But I am in contact with a young woman now who was just recently given rapid rehousing and is coming up on the 6-month mark where she's going to have to take over the rent. She was sent at age 19 home to her mother. So her what do you call placement plan? Her plan was changed from independence to reunification at age 19. She went back with her mother. It's failed spectacularly, and she ended up homeless, and now she's got rapid rehousing, but she needs a voucher. So it, again, is a matter of what is going to work for that youth. But the reality is, if a kid makes it to 18 in the child welfare system, they're probably going to need a voucher. And DC has a small enough portfolio of youth that all of those youth could actually get vouchers, whether they're going to be in contact with their parents or not.
Really helpful. Thank you.
Mhm.
In your opinion, is CFSA's current practice for arranging housing for older youth consistent with established best practices in the field?
Well, no, but I don't think that's really the fault of CFSA. I think CFSA has Tuesday meetings, and those involve the continuum of care, which I respect deeply. But the continuum of care diverts youth away from vouchers because they don't meet the chronically homeless definition. So the family unification program vouchers, the relationship between the housing authority and the child welfare agency should be working in tandem with that, but separately, right? So they should certainly be preventing homelessness. They should be reporting that to the continuum of care through HMIS, but those youth should not be sent through coordinated entry to get determined as eligible for FYI. That's a complete violation of the spirit and intent with which foster youth wrote this program. So it's a very easy fix. They just need to extract the COC from the Tuesday meetings that they have about what's the best interest of the young people aging out.
Thank you. Very helpful. And then how would you respond to the argument that most youth who age out aren't prepared to live in an apartment of their own, and that providing them with a voucher could lead to worse long-term outcomes than a referral to a specialized provider?
Oh, I couldn't disagree more. So if I cut out a bit of my oral testimony, what I mentioned was there is this phenomenon of Wayne Place. So that functions kind of like supervised independent living. They should be doing that between the ages of, say, 17, 18, and 21. And during that period, increasingly moving towards independence. That independent living has been on the books since the 80s. There's a way to do that that we'd be happy to train CFSA on doing. But the reality is, as they move closer to age 21, that is when you would then ask them if a voucher would be the right move for them. So for example, I think a lot of young people are told you can go to Wayne Place and then you can get a voucher. But Wayne Place does not then complete the transaction and give them a voucher. So I'll just say this last thing, Chairwoman. Youth who end up aging out of foster care, having not found permanency or being adopted or reunified, spend on average 1,500 days in care. That seems like a sufficient amount of time to move someone towards self-sufficiency before giving them the voucher and sending them to the housing.
Yeah, thank you for that. Would you make any changes to this bill to ensure that every youth leaving care is housed?
I wouldn't, but I think the committee can continue to be vigilant. So someone, I think it might have been Tony, said that there should be more reporting about who gets a voucher and who doesn't get a voucher and how they do. Actually, I think CFSA did provide you with a report that showed that only one young person out of 40 got a voucher. I happen to be in contact with that young woman, and she's doing great and she's working, but that's only 1 out of 40. So I wouldn't make any changes to the bill. I think it just emphasizes what the federal government has provided, and it encourages DC it requires DC to make sure they access that. So I think Dan, by the way, your staff person did a wonderful job pulling that bill together. So.
Me too. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. And thanks to this panel. And we will move to our next. It will turn out to be our last public witness panel because not everyone was able to join in the end today. So we will have a panel of 5, I believe. So, okay. So our next panel includes Ashley Strange, Donna Flannery, President of the Board, the Foster and Adoptive Parent Advocacy Center, Daniel Hatcher, Professor of Law at the University of Baltimore School of Law. And Amy C. Harfeld, National Policy Director at the Children's Advocacy Institute. And Marla Spindell, Executive Director of the DC Kin Care Alliance. Ashley, when you are ready, you may turn on your camera, unmute yourself, and begin.
Chairperson and members of the Human Service Committee. My name is Ashley Strange, and I'm the Program Manager for the Preparing Youth for Adulthood program at CASA for Children of DC. PYA works with transitioning age youth who help them gain independent skills that they need to transfer over into adulthood. PYA was founded to address the need of foster youth aging out without the necessary skills needed to live successful adult lives. If you have a foster youth who ages 14 to 20 that will benefit from our services, please email pya@casadc.org to make that referral. I am in full support of both bills presented today, but today I will be providing brief testimony on the Pocket Act of 2022. This piece of legislation is a critical step forward in ensuring that DC's most vulnerable population is protected from losing their rightful benefits losing their rightful benefits and from possibility of incurring debt as they age out of foster care. Youth have aged out in the past owing large sums of money to the Social Security Administration due to the failure to properly report their income status. This legislation is deeply important to me because of my own experiences dealing with this issue when I aged out of foster care with overpayments. There was no appeal for these overpayments on my behalf. However, today I'm not speaking for myself. I am speaking for those who are currently in foster care who could face this issue. I am elated to see that the bill would require the agency to be responsible for the overpayments that occur while the child is under their care. I believe that the following recommendations will help strengthen the bill. For the first recommendation, to ensure that the agency is updating the income status of youth who receive Social Security benefits with the Social Security Administration whenever their status change. This will help in preventing the overpayments from occurring to begin with. For the second recommendation, a 2010 Social Security Administration policy change allowed for youth in foster care to apply for benefits 60 days prior to them aging out. Processing these applications can take time. It is my understanding that not all youth are screened for Social Security benefits upon entering foster care. For those not screened, I recommend that the agency help youth apply for benefits 120 days prior to aging out. Thank you for your time today. I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Donna Flannery.
Good morning, Chairperson Nadeau. It is my pleasure to be here this morning with you and to all of the council members as well that may be present on Human Services. I am a veteran foster parent. I have been fostering for 22 years now, and I am currently the chairperson for the board of directors for the Foster and Adoptive Parent Advocacy Center, and I am excited to be here this morning. I also have with me, you can see my daughter. She's my firstborn. Her name is Tamika, and she was my firstborn out of all the foster children that I've ever had. And I'm just glad to have her here. She has a couple of words. I said I would give her some time. FAPAC supports both of the bills, the housing bill and the pocket bill. We are thrilled that DC wants to follow the other states that are doing this and getting this right. This initiative is extremely important to our youth who have these benefits, who have the rights to these benefits. We are a valued partner with CFSA, and we're glad that there will be local funds to replace the shortage that this bill might create for the agency. we still need to make sure that all of the services and things that our children currently need are not put in jeopardy in any way. We are also glad that there will be a financial literacy component to help the children be able to put these funds into best use once they get it or have access to it. But I'm going to pause for a moment, and I'm going to flip my camera for a little bit and let my daughter just have a couple of words that she would like to say to you, Councilperson.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, I would say. My name is Tamika Smith. I'm a former care. Sorry, I was in a foster care for about 4 years. I got in at 17. I was 21 when I emancipated. I was 18 when I went through a panic attack. For this very important reasons was because turning 18 was scary, but turning 21 and emancipating the system was very unknown to me of how I was going to be living after foster care. I was able to, get a little bit going on with a job and being able to get my own apartment, but it was kind of a struggle. But I wanted to thank y'all for having me on. I just wanted to give a little bit of piece of my story. Thank you.
Tamika has done very well, but it was a struggle for her. And having had access to these funds would have given her a better platform to move forward. As you know, I've submitted my testimony, and you can read the in-depth details that I put in. The statistics are the same across the board. But what I would want to say is that if we can help our kids not go into poverty, then they'll have more success in their life. We know that housing is extremely important, and their mental well-being, to be able to know that they're going to be okay. It's frightening and it's terrifying for our youth. This bill will help them to be able to have a little bit more of a foundation where they are able to say, okay, I can do this. I almost lost her mentally and emotionally at 18 because she was terrified of what was going to happen. And despite I'm telling her, you'll be 21 before you have to leave my home. It didn't matter because she was like, 18, I'm gonna be on my own. What am I gonna do? And so it took a minute. I think when she turned 19 and a half,
Yeah.
she was still with me. She was like, okay, that I will,
I got time.
I'll be able to do this. But the 20,000 some odd youth that leave out of foster care annually, 50%, they don't have the earnings. And actually we had to support her, me and another team member of hers had to support her in order for her to get housing because she couldn't apply for it and get it on her own. So if it were not for us doing a cosign for her, she just didn't have it. So the housing piece is extremely important. And then to just be able to know that I can get a place to live, that I have the ability to pay my bills and to be solid and sure-footed. That's extremely important. And so I have a lot of thoughts on some of the solutions about how the money can be managed and how it can be dealt with some of the things that we already have in place. I'm excited to answer any questions that you have for me. Thank you
so much, both of you, for your testimony. Now we'll hear from Dan Hatcher.
Thank you, Chairperson, members of the committee. Thank you for your leadership on these important bills. I do also very much support the housing bill, although I'm here to specifically testify in support of what is being termed the Pocket Act. And I have to say, I liked that acronym, because it's simply stating that the agency needs to stop pocketing children's funds, right? And those resources that belong to children, to youth, should stay in their own pocket, so they can use their own resources to help themselves when they age out of care, and for resources that they need beyond the agency's typical services while they're in care. This practice has been deeply concerning. I've been working on it for a while, both in scholarship and in teaching and policy work. DC is not alone in its practices, but the fact that multiple places have been doing bad stuff doesn't make it right. And I applaud your leadership in moving forward toward righting this wrong. The agency exists for the sole reason of protecting foster youth interests, right? taking their funds is not according to that purpose, period. It's that simple. The children have no legal obligation to use their own funds to pay for their own foster care. Not only are they taking their funds, they're doing it often without telling the youth of this practice. So this is a crucially important bill, both realistically, the practical impact on having a huge benefit for foster youth to be able to benefit from their own funds, and also symbolically to make sure that our agency that exists to serve foster youth is adhering to that purpose. I also wanted to point out just a couple specific things, some concerns regarding the agency's written testimony. As was pointed out well by Ruth Ann, the agency's testimony that essentially they don't know how to do this, or they don't have the knowledge or expertise to do this, is really concerning, because they've been doing this for years, just in the wrong way, right? They've been assertively seeking out ownership control over children's funds, and then diverting those funds to city coffers without telling youth for years. This bill simply says they need to manage the children's resources correctly in the children's best interest. In fact, DC even has a Bill of Rights that is provided to foster youth, right? That the agency helped create and is supposedly handed out to foster youth. And one of those specific items on the Bill of Rights, it says the children's belongings and money is theirs, period, right? And when they leave care, they leave with their belongings, right? So all this bill does is simply make that Bill of Rights true, right? And we ought to be true to our mission, and that's really what this bill is all about. Couple more specific details, some of the concerns that the agency raised regarding savings vehicles. There are multiple types of saving vehicles available that are exempt from the SSI asset limit for those children who get the disability benefits. States have already been doing this in other jurisdictions. Jurisdictions, including DC, use a special needs trust for years, for decades, right, and other purposes, including Medicaid planning, right? So that's a vehicle that has been around for a long, long time. And is available now. Also, what's important to point out, and it's concerning the agency didn't refer to this in their own testimony, is survivor benefits, right? OASDI benefits have no asset limit, right? All the agency needs to do is stop taking the money from children, right? Period, right? So the fact that they don't mention that in their testimony is concerning. And then again, with the SSI benefits, there are additional uses of those resources, right, for other current needs beyond what the agency would normally provide that could be in a child's best interest, that are exempt from the asset limit. Buying a car is exempt from the asset limit, right? And imagine how many foster youth could benefit from using their own resources, help them buy transportation that they will so desperately need as they transition to independence. If the agency simply keeps the focus on best interest of the children, best interest of the family, right? That is always their guide rather than their own fiscal interests, right? There's really unlimited creative ways in which the agency can do that. They just got to keep their eye on the ball. And I think this bill does exactly that. I thank you again for your leadership, and thank everyone for participating, especially those individuals who have lived experiences. Wonderful to hear your stories. Thank you.
Thank you. Amy Hartfeld.
Good afternoon, Councilwoman Nadeau and other guests and members here. My name is Amy Hartfeld. I am a children's attorney and serve as the National Policy Director for the Children's Advocacy Institute. We are a nonprofit children's rights group based in San Diego that works to strengthen the rights of foster youth, both while they're in care, while they're aging out of care. We have some work that focuses on California youth, but I'm here in the DC area and do all of our federal and national policy advocacy work. I am here to express fervent support for the Pocket Act related to the screening, application, and proper use of foster youth's federal benefits while they're in care. I became involved in this work about 20 years ago when I had a 17-year-old client by the name of Jasmine, who I was helping to emancipate from care early at the age of 17 at her request. She had already been accepted into college with a partial scholarship and had worked in her uncle's deli for about 4 years, saving about $13,000. She went to the bank to withdraw a tuition deposit and was told by the bank that her account had been frozen and all but $2,000 of her earnings had been intercepted by the state of New York. She wanted my help getting it back. After some research, I learned that the foster care agency had applied for disability benefits on her behalf when she entered care without ever informing her or me, her attorney, and had appointed itself to receive her money and then deposited every last dollar of her benefits into their own account to reimburse themselves for her foster care. Even worse, they had taken her savings in order to maintain her eligibility for disability benefits, which she never knew she had and never saw a dollar of. She was shocked and devastated to know that the agency that was supposed to protect her and look out for her best interest was taking her money behind her back. I told her I wouldn't be able to help her get her money back. She was not able to make her tuition deposit and had to defer enrollment in college and begin looking for alternate housing, as the dorms were her planned housing at the time. Across the nation, as the councilwoman has introduced, this is a common practice. And I won't go over all of the details, but as you've heard, the practice is not only unethical, it decreases youth's opportunities to achieve self-sufficiency when they leave care. And it is certainly contrary to their best interest. Just imagine for a moment, in the context of your own family and loved ones, learning that a public agency has applied for your insurance benefits, your entitlement dollars, without ever letting you or your representative know, and pocketed all of that money to reimburse themselves for something that was never your duty to pay for in the first place. The average age of self-sufficiency in the US is 26. One study revealed that the average American youth receives about $50,000 in financial support from their parents between the ages of 18 and 26. This could be food, housing, education, healthcare expenses, and direct cash assistance. Yet foster youth are expected to achieve self-sufficiency on their own without these supports. Adoption of this bill will begin to close at least that portion of the economic gap for some of the most vulnerable youth in care, those who are disabled or who have lost one or both of their parents. Parents work hard to set their children up for success. When the city or the state acts as the legal parent of the foster children, it should also work towards, not undermine, that goal. Foster youth have no obligation to pay for their own foster care. The federal government and the city government, in this case, are obligated under federal and city law to pay for foster care, and they do so for all other foster children who don't happen to be receiving these benefits. As has been stated, these benefits are the property of the youth, and taking them violates constitutional law, violates their property interests, and violates their civil rights. If this Pocket Act is passed, it will mark the most ambitious and comprehensive reform to the problem yet. It will serve as an example for other states across the country and ultimately for Congress to follow. We have word that a federal bill will hopefully be introduced over the next year. I want to commend Councilwoman Nadeau and her amazing staff for their dedication to this issue, for strategically crafting such a strong bill to ensure that children's benefits stay in their, not the agency's, pockets. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have been trying to promote Kimberly Holmes. I don't know if we succeeded at that or if we're planning to try to unmute. Oh, there she is. Okay, so Kimberly, I think, I don't know if you're able to turn your camera on and unmute yourself. If you are, we can proceed with your testimony. All right, let's go to Marla Spindell and we can come back to Kimberly if she's able to make the tech work.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Nadeau and members of the Committee on Human Services. My name is Marla Spindell. I'm the Executive Director of DC Kin Care Alliance. Our mission is to support the legal, financial, and related service needs of relative caregivers who step up to take in DC children in times of crisis when their parents are unable to care for them. I'm pleased to testify today in support of the Pocket Amendment Act of 2022, which among other things will ensure that the purposes of the DC Grandparent Caregiver Program and the Close Relative Caregiver Program are fully achieved. Specifically, the act would ensure that relatives approved for these subsidies receive the full monthly amount retroactive back to the date of application. Currently, relatives who apply for the subsidy often have to wait 3 to 6 months before they receive a subsidy card that only includes an amount equal to at most 1 month and oftentimes only a partial month subsidy. Typically, this waiting period is no fault of the relative, but is due to processing glitches, agency bureaucratic hurdles, and wait times for the bank to issue the card and send it to the agency. This act would help to make whole relatives who have waited patiently for the subsidy due to the agency's inability to process their applications in a timely manner. To address some of these same issues regarding timeliness of application processing, as well as reasonable notification to applicants if they are to be terminated from the program, we're asking the committee to consider additional amendments that would be consistent with the requirements for other public assistance programs such as TANF, SNAP, and others. Specifically, we recommend that the act include the same 45-day application processing timeframe already applicable to the other public assistance programs, and the same 15-day notice requirement for termination from the program that's applicable to other DC public assistance programs. We further ask the council to consider a technical amendment to the current DC law eligibility requirements to ensure they're calculated appropriately and fairly. Under current law, the application is eligible for the programs if their, quote, household income is under 200% of the federally defined poverty level. The law does not specify whether this amount should be calculated on a daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly basis. While we understand the agency typically calculates household income annually, there's no such requirement in the law, and indeed the subsidy agreement that the participants sign states that they've been determined eligible based on their weekly income being under 200% of FPL. Accordingly, gig workers, contractors, or seasonal workers could be unfairly determined ineligible, even though their annual income would be below 200% of FPL. To ensure this does not occur, the DC Council should amend the law to add the word annual before the word household. I think that's what was intended by the law, and I think it's just an oversight that that word was not included. We also recommend that the current law include language similar to a bill currently being considered by the council, Bill 24-0489, called Expanding Fee Waivers for Low-Income Litigants Act of 2021, which has language that ensures that the language that would be similar would be that the agency would make all efforts to determine and or resolve any doubt about eligibility in favor of the applicant. Finally, to address inflation and the escalating costs of raising a child in DC, we'd like the council to consider a change to the eligibility limits as well as the subsidy amounts. With respect to the eligibility limits, we request the council implement a stepped approach to eligibility such that a caregiver would not be terminated from the programs when they obtain a job or a better paying job that would push them just over the income limit. In this regard, we recommend a stepped income approach that allows for partial subsidy eligibility, such as the following. 200 to 249% of FPL would be 3/4 subsidy, 250 to 299% would be half subsidy, and 300 to 349% of FPL would be a quarter subsidy. We note that even at 300% of FPL, a family in DC is still poor and has a difficult time making ends meet. And the FPL does not take into consideration the different cost of living standards in different jurisdictions. We also ask that the rates for these programs be put at what they were originally intended to be, which was at least 95% of the foster care rates. Right now it's set at 66%, and we ask that the council consider reestablishing the original rates. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Kimberly, so you're unmuted.
Yes,
There you go.
Council, I apologize. Oh, God.
You okay there? We may have lost you, Kimberly. Okay. We are going to do some questions. If Kimberly comes back to us, we can let her testify. But I will start. Professor Hatcher, you noted that there were inaccuracies in the testimony provided by CFSA. Could you state in greater detail what you believe those to be?
Sure. Well, one of my concerns is their lack of addressing the difference between SSI and survivor benefits, right? Is to be very clear that with survivor benefits, there's no asset limit. There is no necessary complexity at all with the type of savings of vehicle that would have to be exempt from the asset limit.
Okay.
Right? All they have to do really with survivor benefits is stop taking the money, right? You know, so that's immediate. With SSI, there is currently an asset limit. Now there's a federal bill that would propose increasing that from 2,000 to 10,000. I would love to see that go through, but we'll see whether that happens. In the meantime, that is an asset limit that is supposed to be navigated, which is why representative payees exist, right? That's the whole point. That's the whole point of really the child welfare agency, is again, navigate the complexities of life in the legal system to help youth in their care, right? And then representative payees are specifically existing to navigate the financial and legal landscapes, right, regarding these Social Security benefits, right, to manage those in the best interest of youth in their care, of beneficiaries, in this case, children. And there are multiple savings of vehicles that can be exempt from the asset limit. Some have already been used in Maryland. The special needs trusts, right, are available right now. There is some that will be to use the potential 529A plans called ABLE accounts, right, or the PASS program available by the Social Security Administration. I think that'll take a little doing, right? But again, that's why the agency exists, is to do that doing, right, to do what's best for foster youth in their care. But in the meantime, there's already an account available right away in terms of the special needs trusts. And then it's that's the fact that the agency has testified in opposition to this bill, right? When they've been taking children's resources without telling them for years is really, really concerning. They need to own the mistakes that they've been making and doing things that have been harmful to youth and rectify those acts. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question I have is to you and also to Ms. Harfeld. In its testimony, CFSA contends that the benefits conservation scheme laid out in the bill would lead to youth losing their benefits or getting huge tax bills. Is that accurate? And if not, could you say why?
Well, if they're talking about losing their benefits, the only concern could be regarding the asset limit, right? Which is what I was just talking about. That again is why a representative payee exists. It's supposed to manage youth funds, use them in their best interest, including navigating, right, the asset limit, right? Any fiduciary, that's why they exist. If you consider somebody who's like the fiduciary for an estate after someone passes away, they're supposed to figure out a way to manage those resources for the estate, right? It's a fiduciary relationship. If they're a fiduciary, right, and they're only supposed to act in the best interest of those beneficiaries, but instead they're taking resources from those beneficiaries for themselves, right? The fiduciary is doing that for a cost that the beneficiaries had no obligation to pay for. There couldn't be a more direct violation of fiduciary obligation. So they mentioned also potentially liability. If there's liability, their liability right now is there massive breach of fiduciary obligations that have been going on for years.
Amy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, all I wanted to add is you know, I read the testimony, and I'm also troubled by the lack of support for the bill, and to acknowledge that DC needs to get on the right side of this, as well as set a good example. And what I'm reminded of from my own time working for the Child Welfare Agency in New York City on my end is that change is hard. It's hard in large bureaucracies, and it does take some getting used to. And it will take a little bit of time to stop using their time and energy to intercept children's money on their own behalf and instead use those administrative resources to establish processes to set up the right accounts for young people so that they can receive their benefits, maintain their eligibility, and age out with sufficient resources to help them pay for what we can already predict they will need help with. And we've heard today, housing, food, sometimes childcare for their children, and medical care and other supports. So it's, there certainly will be some growing to do, but that's absolutely no basis for not allowing this to go through.
And Professor Hatcher, I saw that you consulted on the drafting of a bill in Maryland that was very similar to this one. Are you aware of any challenges in the implementation of that bill, which we should be aware?
Well, the only challenges have been in Maryland. I think the DC bill is better because Maryland was limited to an age starting at 14 and older when they started to protect youth benefits. So I already applaud DC as Amy indicated in terms of taking lead to improve upon that legislation. A challenge has been, I think, in them figuring out which savings vehicle to use, and they decided on the special needs trust. So I'm not even sure if I'd call it a challenge. It was just a decision so far that they've opted to use those. I think they could, and I think there's a really unique opportunity for an agency like in DC to work with the Social Security Administration, work with the private financial provider for 529 ABLE accounts, and figure out if those could be better tools. Right. And I hope that happens. I think there could be some really unique examples there. I will say, too, like in fairness to the agency, I do think the agency needs more funds, right, to do their job well. But the answer just is not to take resources from the very children you exist to serve. Right. That's just never the case. It's nonsensical at best. It's unethical and it's illegal, I'd argue, in terms of breach of fiduciary obligation. And when they do this, it doesn't even result and more funding to the agency. It simply supplants required city spending, right, by taking the resources from kids. So the city needs to step up as well to do what's right, not just directing this at the agency. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Hartfeld, I know that several other jurisdictions have considered or are considering legislation similar to the Pocket Act. What jurisdictions have taken action on this issue, and how does their legislation compare to the Pocket Act?
So over the last year, several states have introduced or passed bills, including Texas, Hawaii, California, Minnesota, Illinois, Connecticut, the department in New York City, ACS, Los Angeles County has done something specifically, and we actually just saw a bill pass in the Philadelphia City Council last week. So those approach this from a variety of perspectives. Some of those bills moved with the full support of the agency itself. The one in New York City was introduced by the agency, who stepped up to say, geez, it's probably not productive for us to be reaching into foster youth's pockets to take their money and then leaving them without their resources when they age out. And they voluntarily decided to stop taking the money. Some of the bills really take a limited approach to setting aside a small portion of the foster youth's benefits. Some of them have age restrictions. Some of them focus more on one category of benefits than all benefits and assets. So I would say that among the bills that have been introduced, the three most important parts are that the agency screen and apply for benefits when children come into care, whenever that is, whether they're babies, whether they are school age, whether they are teenagers, that the agency provide notice to the youth. They need to know what's being done on their behalf, and their attorneys, and those who are involved in their lives, so that they can help make decisions about how this relates to their futures, and be informed about how the money is being spent, what their options are to help direct that somebody they care about in their life could be served as the payee, including their parent, grandparent, a relative, a trusted adult. The agency is supposed to be the last possible option on the list of who steps up to serve. And then the third critical piece that we think is part of an effective bill is making sure that, as you said at the very beginning here, we just have to stop taking children's money. So we need to make sure that their assets end up being used for them for things that are not currently covered that they need. You could have a special piece of medical equipment necessary for a disabled child that the agency can't or won't provide. You could have a young person who wants to participate in an extracurricular activity that's expensive and beyond the means of the agency. That's what their money is for. If they don't need it now for something the agency can't provide, it should be conserved for their future use. So the DC bill hits all of those marks, and in addition, takes the really critical step of making sure to provide some financial literacy training to young people to prepare them to utilize these benefits according to their plans and wishes and hopes for their futures, as well as to provide some financial literacy training for new representative payees, perhaps relatives who haven't served in this role before and want to make sure that they're going to do right by the young people who they're the trustees of their account for.
Thank you. Have you heard yet of any jurisdictions that have incurred liability for failing to comply with the terms of a benefits conservation scheme like the one in our bill?
No.
Oh, okay. Could either of you speak to the Children's Law Center's concern about some of the potential trade-offs between the Title IV-E and SSI payments if the Pocket Act were to be implemented?
I'd be happy to. So that's another change I'd love to see happen at the federal level, where SSI and 4E should be delinked, but it hasn't happened yet. So right now, 4E is unfortunately considered income based on need to youth, even though the youth never see 4E benefits, right? Those are funds that are provided to the agency to provide services, but they count against SSI dollar for dollar. But there is already guidance at the federal level from Administration for Children and Families that instructs agencies in making that decision between picking a 4E if a child is 4E eligible or if the child is SSI eligible, is you pick which is best for the child, because that makes sense, right? Every single action of the agency is supposed to be driven by the children's best interests. So it could be where currently it results in a slight reduction of 4E funds. But again, like you're talking about funding that is supposed to be for the best interests of children, right? The agency doesn't exist for itself. This isn't an industry that is supposed to be self-perpetuating, right? That they need more and more money so the agency can keep existing. They should be working to put themselves out of business, right? So if we're getting more funds to youth and themselves, if they can help themselves, results in a little bit less 4E time being, that's in the best interest of the children. That's the decision that should be made.
Okay. That's all I got, unless anybody on the panel has anything else they'd like to add before we go to the next panel.
Can I just add one other thing? I also want to echo Ruth Ann's comment. I thought Dan, and I like his name particularly, has done really excellent work as a staff person here in your office working on this bill. I've worked with staff in multiple states and cities, and he's very impressive in terms of the effort to work through this. And I did really appreciate my opportunity to speak with agency officials, and I hope that they're still in good faith in their desire to move forward on this if the bill hopefully passes. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks to this panel. It looks like the commissioner had to leave. But just to double check, Commissioner Adolfo, if you are here and under a different name or something, just raise your hand so we can see you. Now, I saw him earlier. He may just have had another obligation. Okay. So then I do want to thank Commissioner Adolfo, even in his absence, for organizing neighbors in support of the housing bill. We really appreciate the grassroots effort. Okay. So we're going to now be joined by 3 representatives of the Child and Family Services Agency. Natalie Craver, who's Deputy Director of the Office of Community Partnerships, Nicole K. Gilbert, who is the Deputy Director for the Office of Wellbeing, and Lathasha Tomlin from the agency's Kinship Services Division. Ms. Craver is joined by Jenna Savasco, who's Chief of Staff at the District of Columbia Housing Authority. I am going to ask all of you to raise your right hand and answer the following. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you are about to give to the Committee on Human Services is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
We do. We do.
Yeah. Great. So Ms. Craver, you can begin your testimony, then we'll move on to Ms. Gilbert and Ms. Tomlin. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairperson Nadeau and members of the Committee on Human Services. I am Natalie Craver, Deputy Director of the Office of Community Partnerships at the DC Child and Family Services Agency. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the available housing opportunities for youth exiting foster care in the district, and to share some updates on CFSA's work to provide the most appropriate and supportive housing resources to meet youth's needs. CFSA partners with the DC Housing Authority and the Homeless Services Continuum of Care to implement a coordinated approach to accessing and utilizing U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development HUD-funded Family Unification Program FUP vouchers for youth and families. Through my testimony today, I will provide insight into CFSA's substantive work to ensure that youth do not exit foster care to homelessness, and clarify why there is not a need for Bill 24-0941, Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Amendment Act of 2022, as CFSA and DCHA are already doing the stated work to support youth's ongoing access to the Fostering Youth to Independence Initiative vouchers. On July 13, 2022, a press release that you issued introduced the Fostering Stable Housing Opportunities Act of 2022. It stated, youth aging out in the district are just as likely to be homeless immediately upon leaving care as they are to be living on their own. These are outcomes of a child welfare system that, rather than preparing youth to live independently, often refers them into homelessness. CFSA believes that children, youth, and young adults all deserve a family. We strive every day to ensure that they are part of families who are unconditionally committed to their success. We believe the best way for young adults to enjoy long-term stability and to thrive into adulthood is to be surrounded by family and build lifelong supports. According to the Pew Research Center, in July of 2020, in the U.S., 52% of all young adults aged 18 to 29 resided with one or both parents. Taking into consideration the high cost of living and the shortage of affordable housing in the district, it is more important now than ever for the city's child welfare system to focus on achieving permanency for all children and youth before adulthood. Permanency is the greatest support CFSA can provide, but when it cannot be achieved before a child turns 21, CFSA, through our Office of Youth Empowerment, works to ensure each youth has a clear and specific plan for housing and economic stability and mobility, as well as the educational and concrete resources to thrive independent of foster care. This work starts when a youth turns 18, but really when they're 14 and can take advantage of our Making Money Grow program, and lasts until they leave our care. Every youth exiting care has a written housing plan within 6 months of their 21st birthday, and that housing plan is reviewed monthly by CFSA's program staff and management. In the rare instances where youth are either in abscondence or are incarcerated on their 21st birthday, the services provided by the Continuum of Care ensure that they still have access to an important social safety net, even when they are unwilling or unable to work with CFSA to facilitate a plan for their transition. CFSA understands the intent behind the legislation and is fundamentally in agreement with the premise that no youth should exit foster care to homelessness. Safe and affordable housing is foundational to both youth and family stability. While we agree that FUP and FYI are critical resources for many young adults and families, our experience informs the belief that a voucher is not the appropriate resource for every youth who exit care. An array of housing opportunities is essential to addressing the diverse needs of youth we support in their transitions to independent living. We have seen in practice that older youth often fare better if we can help identify a supportive family for whom they can live with, versus expecting that they live independently immediately upon exiting care. Making this assessment is unique for each youth and is bolstered by the work with the youth to understand not only their network of family and friends and lifelong connections, but also what are their goals and what do they need to feel safe and secure in a living situation. The same press release also stated, this legislation requires CFSA to do its part to make FYI vouchers a reality and the norm for youth leaving care. The agency would be required to do everything in its power, including a list of enumerated actions taken directly from the HUD notice establishing FYI to secure vouchers. I'd like to provide some important context and background regarding the district's allocation of FUP and FYI vouchers and share CFSA's efforts to bring FYI vouchers into our array. As a district's public housing authority, DCHA has been awarded in totality 422 FUP vouchers. 373 of these vouchers were awarded before 2008. 48 additional vouchers were awarded more recently in FY 2019 in what's called the 2017-2018 allocation. CFSA, DCHA, and the COC are all parties to an existing MOU that allowed us to apply for the vouchers, and we have been since working together to establish and maintain a fair and unbiased process and parameters by which youth and families can be selected to apply for a FUP voucher. Each week, CFSA uses weekly Housing Review Committee meetings comprised of CFSA leadership, management, and the relevant direct service staff to review all known youth and families in need of housing assistance. The HRC recommends the most appropriate housing resource for each youth or family within 1 week of the application's review. CFSA is working steadily with DCHA to expeditiously utilize our existing allocation of FUP vouchers. And at this time, FUP vouchers are still available for use by both youth and families. Until CFSA has utilized, meaning leased, and not just recommended them or deemed them eligible, 90% of our current allocation of FUP vouchers, DCHA will not qualify to apply for competitive or non-competitive FYI vouchers from HUD. The non-competitive FYI vouchers and the FOSHO amendments to the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 are exciting, and CFSA looks forward to being able to access this functionally unlimited resource for youth exiting care for up to 5 years. That said, while we currently do have FUP resources available and continue to recommend youth and families as appropriate, we are also actively working with DCHA and the COC to update our MOU, which just needs minor updates, to support applying for non-competitive FYI vouchers in the future. In addition, we meet with DCHA monthly to review the status of all youth and families who've been recommended for FUP, and we continue to analyze and refine our processes in collaboration with our partners to ensure we're supporting youth to access, utilize, and take advantage of supportive services made available through FUP and FYI. As always, we appreciate the council's support for the district's most vulnerable children, youth, and families, and its efforts to ensure youth do not exit foster care to homelessness. We are confident in our partnership with DCHA and the COC, and we are well on our way to accessing the FYI vouchers to be utilized by all youth whose needs would best be met by a FYI voucher. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions, and as well, and joined by Jenna Savasco from DCHA.
Okay. Is there anybody else who will be offering testimony, or should we just jump right in?
I will be offering testimony on the Pocket Act.
I think you can go ahead and give that now before and then we'll just do questions all at once.
Great. Good afternoon, Chairperson Nadeau, council members and staff. My name is Nicole Gilbert, Deputy Director for the Office of Wellbeing for DC Child and Family Services Agency, CFSA. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today on B24-0857, the Preserving Our Kids' Equity Through Trust Amendment Pocket Act of 2022. Today's testimony will focus on the newly created sections of the law that would require CFSA to conserve children's federal benefits. CFSA has no concerns with the amendments to the Grandparent Caregivers Program, GCP, and the Close Relative Caregivers Program, CRCP. We support the move to make the CRCP permanent. However, CFSA recommends that the GCP and the CRCP programs are combined into one and renamed the District's Relative Caregiver Program. Accompanying me today is Latasha Tomlin, Kinship Program Manager, who will answer any GCP, CRCP questions. Overall, CFSA does not support this bill as we have serious concerns with the trust portion of the proposed legislation. CFSA appreciates the Council's efforts to provide a safety net and conserve supplemental security income, SSI, and Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI benefits for youth in the district's care. As you know, CFSA has a representative payee program comprising of one staff member who is dedicated to ensuring that the youth eligible to receive SSI and SSDI benefits have appropriate information for the Social Security Administration. to determine if the benefits are approved and if CFSA can serve as a payee on behalf of the youth. If CFSA is approved as the payee, the funds are used to supplement board and care while the youth is in foster care. The funds for each youth are deposited in a special purpose revenue account, and they are tracked by the youth's identifying information. When a youth exits care, unused funds are returned to SSA for processing to ensure there is no overpayment, which allows the youth to continue to receive and to maximize their eligible benefits upon leaving care. In preparation of the youth's transition from foster care, CFSA educates and supports the youth and/or the youth family on the process of how to apply for SSI or SSDI benefits and how to apply to serve as the payee, a role that is solely approved by SSA. Although CFSA understands the Council's intended purpose for the legislation, the agency does not support it as written. There are several concerns regarding this bill. First, establishing tax advantage accounts. The proposed legislation requires CFSA to monitor and conserve child youth SSI, SSDI benefits in a tax advantage account. It states that CFSA shall monitor any federal asset or resource limits for the benefits and ensure that the child's best interest is served by conserving the benefits in a way that avoids violating or exceeding any federal asset or resource limits that would affect the child's eligibility to receive the benefits, which may include applying for and/or establishing various accounts on the child's behalf, such as a plan for achieving self-support, PASS account, a 529A college account, an individual development account, and/or a special needs trust. The legislation as written also states that when serving as the child's representative payee, the agency shall take care to avoid the overpayment of any benefits administered by the Social Security Administration. Should the agency discover at any time that overpayment to a child who is or was in the agency's care occurred while the child was in the agency's care, the agency shall either make payment in the full amount of overpayment to the appropriate federal entity or file a request for waiver of overpayment recovery and any necessary appeal or a request for reconsideration with the appropriate federal entity. CFSA does not have the requisite knowledge and expertise in these areas. The complexities and nuances of managing these accounts for our clients will pose a liability risk to the agency if conserved funds result in adverse action regarding benefit eligibility when the youth exit care. Many of the accounts referenced by the proposed legislation have different federal requirements that are out of CFSA's control and could lead to financial consequences for the youth eligible for SSI or SSDI. We believe this task requires a higher level of expertise, such as that of a certified financial analyst who is better equipped to maintain accurate financial records, comply with laws and regulations as they change, protect the assets of the youth, and facilitate advanced financial decision-making when warranted. A certified financial analyst would also significantly reduce the likelihood of a youth receiving overpayment or the agency being out of compliance with federal law, which could jeopardize benefits or delay future payments. 2, grant support for training of youth, SSA representative payees, and fiduciaries. CFSA will be required to award a grant in the amount of $50,000 to a community-based organization for the purpose of offering financial literacy and financial management training and skills building to all children, parents, guardians, and adoptive parents gaining access to funds conserved by the agency. CFSA would like to reiterate the significance of acquiring an organization with the financial focus and background in managing tax advantage accounts and associated tax implications. The grantee will need to be experienced in educating clients not only on financial literacy and financial management training and skills building, but also on how to build personal portfolios. The grantee will also need to begin an introduction into basic investment strategies based on the objective or the needs of the client. 3rd, financial post-permanency planning. The proposed legislation requires CFSA that upon a child's exit from foster care, the agency shall collaborate with the child's attorney. If the child is to be reunified with the child's parents and guardians, the child's parents and guardians, and if the child is to be adopted, the adoptive parents, to develop a written plan in the best interest of the child for the future use and control of funds conserved in accordance with the Act. The agency will also be required to initiate the revision of any plans that conflict with policies or requirements of the Social Service Administration that will result in inconsistent action with the developed plan as written. Again, this is not CFSA's area of expertise, and there may be potential unforeseen monetary implications. Excuse me. To summarize our concerns, the proposed legislation does not address the income tax and financial implications for youth and their families once they begin to withdraw funds from the tax advantage accounts. Although the accounts provide a temporary shield, when youth and families withdraw funds, for some, these monies will count as income. This raises the likelihood that future benefits, financial and medical, could be impacted. Lastly, this proposed legislation requires CFSA's involvement in matters that are outside of CFSA's knowledge, expertise, and control. Given these limitations, the agency believes that the youth will be better serviced by another organization. In the event that the proposed legislation is passed as written, CFSA would need the following resources to implement the new law: a full-time program specialist to help educate, coordinate, and support our in-home families, distribute and manage the grant to a community-based provider, and serve as a representative on the post-case benefit planning team in partnership with the financial analyst. 2, a full-time financial federal analyst to manage and oversee the tax advantage accounts and to monitor for possible tax implications, overpayment, and the appeals process to SSA as needed. And lastly, restoration of annual CFSA operating budget in the amount of $1 million to offset the loss of SSI and SSDI funds that are used to aid in the care of foster youth. The proposed staff additions will be instrumental to ensuring that every youth who is entitled to SSI or SSDI benefits is serviced under this new effort. In conclusion, CFSA remains steadfast in our overall opposition to this legislation. If it were to move forward, we would request that the council provide the supports to CFSA needed to navigate the complicated financial rules governing these trusts, or place this task within an agency better suited to this financial work. A high-functioning financial management organization will decrease the likelihood of unforeseen consequences that may negatively impact our youth and their families. It is our hope that the council will continue to support the mission of CFSA and the work of the agency as intended. CFSA represents an expertise in safety, prevention, permanency, and well-being, and it is our request that the council identifies another entity to spearhead this implementation of this legislation effort. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have this time.
Thank you both for your testimony. I understand the others who've joined you are here to answer questions, but there is not any additional testimony.
That's correct.
Okay, wonderful. So for our team working on housing, when the Housing Review Committee convenes to discuss housing options for older youth, what beyond clinical judgment guides their decisions?
Great. So when we first received the allocation of 48 vouchers, we had a process that was well over a year where we were refining what would be our prioritization criteria that would both determine eligibility, but also help us look at the need of all youth and families who would be requesting access to a FUT voucher, because we have an array of resources to identify where is it the most appropriate. So we created what we call a housing matrix, and we have a family version and a youth version. And that puts out the eligibility requirements of the FUT program, as well as looks at independent living skills, economic stability, ability to increase income over time, how many children, or does the youth have children? So there are a number of different criteria that we have a scoring model, and we look at that, and that helps inform the clinical decisions that our Housing Review Committee makes. So it's a combination of looking at this quantitative tool that helps us understand the eligibility and other factors, along with hearing and discussing the case and then making a decision.
Thanks for that. Is it possible to share the matrix with my team so we can, and to make that public so that people can see what goes into those decisions?
We're glad to share it. It wasn't intended to be a public facing tool because it is used, again, not as a checklist of things you have to meet, but just as a way for us to start to understand. And it's something that we want to evolve. We want there to be updated versions as we continue to work with our COC and with the CHA. So we're glad to share it. But I just want with that caveat that it's not meant to be a checklist for here's how you qualify for different programs. We could definitely put together fact sheets and other tools that would be more appropriate for public information sharing.
Okay, understood. So what data gleaned from the experiences of district youth supports the contention that most are unprepared to live independently upon aging out?
Yeah, so we looked back at our last 2 years of data specifically to look at where did all of our youth aging out of care reside on their 21st birthday, and 89 and 90% respectively chose to live with family, foster parents, or friends, or in other supportive situations. And only, I guess about 10% chose to either go to live independently or go to college. So we are seeing a desire within our youth who are aging out, and in working with the aftercare team and with our OIE staff, that youth want to be living with supports. And not that living independently in your own apartment can't be supportive. We know that we provide collaborative case management and aftercare supports to youth and families through the program, but it's voluntary. And right now we're seeing that the decisions youth are making are to live not independently with other supports.
So how do I want to say this? So, I mean, should we be doing more to prepare them to live independently if you're seeing that they're just generally not ready?
I think that we at CFSA are doing a lot to support youth to be ready to live independently. I think also the data I provided in my testimony, about 50% of all young adults in America are choosing to live with family and other supports. So it's not, I think, specific to just youth aging out of care, but broadly just the housing markets and how we can afford to live in the district. But our Office of Youth Empowerment has, they told me, I think well over like 300 programs were offered over the last number of months, geared around credit counseling, economic mobility, career opportunities, internships. There's a plethora of opportunities made available both while youth are in care. The Making Money Grow accounts that can start at age 14 and can grow with youth over time so that they have resources upon aging out to use for any number of large purchases. And then our aftercare team is there to support youth who, if they exit with a specific housing plan and it breaks down and it isn't the plan that ends up being what they need, those are the cases we're hearing at the HRC meetings. So we are able to support youth who are working with our aftercare program, again, voluntary, but youth who want to work with us, there are plenty of supports available to them.
Okay. That's really helpful. Thank you. And so when we were drafting this legislation, the agency let us know that we were asking them to continue their current practice, which is to provide vouchers to all the youth who need, like the statute says, a primary residence for independent living. So, but how can that be the case when, according to CFSA's performance oversight responses from earlier this year, only one youth in the past 2 fiscal years reported planning to live in their own apartment upon aging out, and 25 to 40% of former district foster youth experience homelessness by age 21.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what I said earlier, that youth are choosing to live with family and with their networks and in different supportive types of environments. So Wayne Place, I know, was mentioned earlier, but there are an array of options for youth, and they are choosing to live with family and with their foster parents. And so I think it's similar to the answer that I already provided, but also the statistics about the 25%, that's a national statistic, and in the district, that's not representative of our population. We are seeing that, like I said, well over 3/4 of our youth are choosing to live with family, and our data also shows no one is exiting to homelessness unless they are in abscondence. In the last 2 years of data, only one youth was in abscondence, but we do not have youth exiting to homelessness. And if they are homeless, we are working through aftercare to make sure they get connected to resources.
Okay. I think we were using a local statistic, not a national one here, so I'm not sure what the discrepancy is. Child Trends is the data source.
Okay, yeah, we'd be happy to look into that statistic and better understand it, and could give a response.
Okay. How many CFSA youth aging out have drawn down federal housing vouchers of any kind in each of the past 5 fiscal years?
So I can speak to the 2017-2018 allocation, which we were awarded in fiscal year 19. Again, the pre-2008 allocation predates our current administrations at both agencies. Tenure, we know who is still housed, but so speaking to the last 5 years, and when we got that allocation in 2019, 9 youth have been housed, 13 are actively in the process. So that's a total of 24 youth that have been identified and are currently in the process of receiving a voucher. And so I just want to give that context that 9 are housed, but even when we have recommended a youth for a voucher, they still have to then submit their packet to the housing authority, have their eligibility determination. Once they've received that voucher, they have 6 months to look for housing. So we have 13 youth who are currently going through the process of getting leased up, and we have 9 youth that are housed.
Thank you. How many CFSA youth have left care to return to living with family in each of the past 5 fiscal years?
So our aftercare team doesn't collect data comprehensively on all youth who have since left, but when youth are coming back to engage with us to look at other housing opportunities, that's when we are working with them. So I don't have data that specifically says what's happened to youth after they have left our care.
So we don't track where people are going as they age out at all?
We do. That's the data I gave you previously about at 21 where they went, but the way the question was phrased, I understood it to be asking me where have youth then gone on to after they have left, and we don't have that data.
I see. Okay, I got you. All right. How many CFSA youth has the agency referred into rapid rehousing in each of the past 5 fiscal years?
So rapid rehousing as the DHS program, none. We don't refer directly to rapid rehousing. That's through the homeless services continuum. So we do not refer youth to that program. We have our own rapid housing program that allows flexible assistance, and many of our youth have taken advantage of rapid housing through CFSA over the last 5 years. I don't have a specific table in front of me to tell you that, but that's in our performance oversight. We always answer that every year on how many youth are using our rapid housing assistance.
So if people come back to the aftercare team and they're in need of housing, there are no instances in which the youth are referred to coordinated entry in the homeless services system?
No, it would either be our rapid housing program, a FUP voucher, or some other assistance or transitional program as that clinically makes sense for that youth.
And do you have any data on the outcomes of youth who moved into their own apartments as opposed to those who moved in with family or referred into the homeless services system?
No, that's an instance of once the youth has already exited care, we're not tracking youth once they're in their communities.
Okay. Does the agency have a concrete plan to get the percentage of youth experiencing homelessness after aging out from 25% to 0? And if not, why not?
So I think that goes back, definitely need to understand that statistic, but yes, because we are consistently working to ensure that youth do not exit foster care to homelessness. And then if youth have unstable housing situations after exit, that they are coming back through aftercare to explore housing options and that we can help meet those needs. But yes, that's fundamentally why we are in agreement with the premise of this legislation that FYI vouchers are valuable, that FUP vouchers are valuable, but why we also believe we don't need the legislation to be doing that because we are committed to doing that.
So do you hear sort of in passing of cases where youth are experiencing housing instability but aren't coming to the aftercare team? I mean, do you become aware of those in other ways?
I'd say infrequently, but yes, if there has been a situation where it's been brought to our attention that there is a youth in need, I think anecdotally in the last 2 years, I've had 1 or 2 times that's come to our attention, and we have looked at those cases during the HRC meetings. And I can say one actually was recommended for a FUP voucher and did not end up using it. So we are willing to hear all cases that are relevant to the eligibility of the FUP voucher program and to housing resources for our youth. But more times than not, we are hearing cases where youth situations have broken down and they're coming back to the HRC to discuss options.
Do you have situations when youth are aging out initially where they are not interested in engaging and you're concerned they may be entering homelessness, but you can't confirm it?
Yeah, I think that it is something that our Office of Youth Empowerment team works on to really support youth and understand their options, what it means to transition out of foster care, the resources they're going to need to be successful. And that's why planning starts when youth are 18, and then there's a 21 Jumpstart meeting 6 months prior to aging out of care to make sure that there's a plan in place and youth understand. And that's why the data shows that, you know, when a youth is in abscondence and is unwilling to work with the agency, we can't force them to, but otherwise we do work to ensure that we are helping youth on their next steps.
And sorry, did you share data earlier about how many are in abscondence?
Yeah, 1 in FY21 and 1 in FY22. So only one in each cohort of youth aging out.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to benefits conservation. The district's Bill of Rights for Youth in Foster Care requires CFSA to allow children to keep their property while in care and to take it with them when they leave. Given that children's benefits are their property under federal law, how is CFSA not allowing them to keep their benefits while in care and taking them with them when they leave care consistent with existing district law?
So one of the things that we do is we actually use the benefits to supplement the care, the aid while they're in foster care. And upon leaving care, we ensure that any unused funds are returned to SSA to ensure that they maximize their benefits. So when they're in care, those funds are used to aid in the care of the child.
Is it a breach of fiduciary duty for CFSA as children's fiduciary to take their benefits to pay for the cost of care when CFSA is already legally obligated to cover those costs?
No, it's not according to federal regulations. We actually use the benefits in accordance with federal regulations.
Okay, so the FY23 budget contemplates the receipt of $1 million in youth benefits by the agency. How much did the agency receive in youth benefits in FY22?
So far through August in FY22, so far this year, we've received $1.1 million.
And for how many youth is CFSA currently serving as the representative payee?
126.
Could you break down what type of benefits each affected youth is receiving?
Sure. 106 youth are receiving SSI, 13 youth are receiving SSDI, and we have 7 youth that receive SSI and SSDI.
And what's the average monthly benefit received by CFSA on behalf of those youth?
The benefits range between $30 and $1,100. So a low of $30 and as high as $1,100.
Okay.
There's a range there.
Okay, and what percentage of the benefits received by CFSA as a representative payee in the past 12 months were spent on the cost of care or used to reimburse the cost of care, and what percentage were just saved in the special purpose revenue fund?
90% of the SSI and SSDI benefits were used for the care of the foster care youth, and 10% were returned back to SSA as unused portions of the funds.
Are those funds ever used to compensate CFSA for the routine costs of care reflected, for instance, in the amount of payment received by foster parents, or are funds just spent on specialized unforeseen expenses like large medical bills?
The funds are actually used primarily for room and board or anything not covered by Medicaid. So like daycare costs and recreational costs and things like that.
Can you give some examples of special expenses not addressed by other budget lines the agencies used youth Social Security benefits to pay for within the past 12 months?
So respite care, daycare, transportation costs, it could be clothing, anything not covered by Medicaid. Sometimes they're medical expenses, treatment.
If the agency believes that it needs a special fund to deal with unanticipated expenses beyond the scope of a foster care stipend, like large specialized medical bills not covered by Medicaid, why not create a special fund for every foster child to address that rather than using the benefits of only some eligible youth for that purpose?
So we weren't exactly clear on this question. What we can say is that any youth in which we don't receive SSI or SSDI, for those youth, we use the CFSA budget to support the cost for their care. And then, of course, for SSI and SSDI recipients, those funds are used.
Okay. What happens to youth who incur the special expenses that the representative's payee program is used to pay for, but who aren't eligible for Social Security benefits?
We use the CFSA budget for that.
Okay. Okay. And then what does the agency currently do with leftover Social Security funds received on a youth's behalf when the youth leaves care? Are you returning those?
We return those. That's correct.
Okay. Do you put interest on that when you return it?
We do not. To my knowledge, we just returned the unused portion of the funds that were provided by SSA.
Do you have any idea if those funds come to the youth through SSA after you return them?
We do not. Once we terminate our payee status, SSA, they no longer communicate with CFSA. So we have no idea what happens with the funds.
How many former foster youth for whom CFSA served as the representative payee and of whom CFSA is aware have subsequently received notices of overpayment from the Social Security Administration?
We'll gather that data for you and make sure that you receive it.
Thank you. What is CFSA's current practice when it's informed that a youth for whom the agency previously served as the representative payee has received a notice of overpayment?
We actually take the information that we receive and we have to verify the dates that they were placed in foster care. We verify whether or not they worked and we reconcile that information. And if it turns out that there was some overpayment, then we notify finance to send a check back to SSA.
Okay. And is that true at the point that they are aging out as well?
That is correct.
Okay. Maryland has used special needs trusts to implement legislation similar to the Pocket Act without incident. Would the agency follow Maryland's lead on using special needs trusts to conserve benefits, or would it rely on another type of advantaged account?
We absolutely don't have the knowledge to inform this question.
Okay. And how many additional personnel do you believe would be necessary to effectively implement the benefits conservation scheme laid out in this legislation?
How many additional personnel would we need?
Yeah.
We talked about the 2 additional full-time staff.
Okay.
The financial analysts and the program specialists.
Okay, right. And then what steps has CFSA taken to prepare for the potential implementation of this legislation?
None at this time, since it has not been finalized.
In your testimony, you note that the additional personnel would be required to effectively implement this legislation. If those personnel were to be provided to CFSA, would the agency still oppose ending the practice of seizing youth benefits?
Well, first, we don't seize their benefits. So we want to make sure that we're clear that we are approved as a payee by SSA. And so that we do use their SSI and SSDI benefits to aid in their care. And yes, even with the additional staff, we would oppose the bill. And we recommend that the role is shifted to an organization that has the financial expertise to handle these matters on behalf of the youth. We believe that the youth deserve to have that level of expertise as it relates to this bill.
Yeah, what if the personnel have the expertise?
We would still have to manage those we would still be responsible for managing those personnel. So we would still be responsible as an agency as they move forward with this bill in implementing the work and implementing the law.
Would the agency oppose the bill even if it just contemplated ensuring that youth don't get bills for overpayment that occurred while their benefits were being utilized?
We were unable to respond to that question because it would actually result in a revision of the current proposed bill. So we would need to read the entire revised bill in order to inform that.
Okay. In regard to the potential fiscal impact of the bill, if a good deal of the funds in the Special Purpose Revenue Fund are not actually used year to year and are instead returned to the Social Security Administration, Why do 100% of those funds have to be accounted for in the potential FIS here?
So the $1 million actually represent the amount of the special revenue purpose account to offset the care of the youth. So if the source of this funding shift, then we would need to use other funds in order to aid CFSA's budget, which would likely be local funds.
So you're saying the $1 million contemplated here is actually what you're spending?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Okay. I have some questions on the voucher programs. When we were drafting this legislation, the agency asked that we start calculating voucher benefits on the day applicants were deemed eligible as opposed to the date on which they applied, because the agency tracks the former but not the latter. Can you walk me through each step in the application process and share with me, when you walk me through that process, when an application is considered complete and when someone is deemed eligible?
Good afternoon, absolutely. A caregiver can access the application via our website, or if they need technical assistance, we are here in the building for them to come here and we will walk through the process with them. They must provide proof of relationship and proof of being the primary caregiver. And they can upload their application, or again, we can work with them here. Once the requested supporting documentation is received and the clearances are scheduled for the caregiver and anyone in the home over the age of 18. Once a caregiver is deemed eligible, the application is approved when the application again and all supporting documentation has been received. A signed subsidy agreement is the final step of the approval, and the caregiver is made aware of their approval status.
Well, why does the agency not track the date on which someone either starts an application or which an application becomes complete, but only the date on which someone is deemed eligible?
We track when it's been received and approved.
Okay. Sorry. All right. So does every subsidy beneficiary get a record of the date on which they were deemed eligible?
Yes.
Okay. And then the introduced version of this legislation requires the payment of arrears dating back to the date when someone first requested a web link at which to apply for a subsidy or otherwise initiated an application for a subsidy, including by submitting a signed application form, regardless of the completeness of the application as a whole at the time of the initiation of the application. We wrote it in that way because the application process for these subsidies can sometimes be very confusing, and people taking in family need the biggest possible payment on their first EBT card to get back on their feet. Why not just track when someone requested a web link or submitted a signed form and calculate payment dating back to that date?
Well, in an effort to be good stewards of the district's funds, we take care in ensuring applicants are eligible before promising payment.
Okay.
Most applicants are honest and forthcoming and move through the process with ease. There are also those who are not as forthcoming and sometimes end up being disqualified. So we don't want to promise payment for those who may not get through the process effectively.
I got you. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate everybody being so prepared today and giving such straightforward answers. That did help us get through all of those questions quite quickly and allow us to contemplate those as we continue with the bill. Is there anything that anybody else would like to add today for the record?
No, thank you.
Okay, well then this will conclude today's public hearing. If you plan to submit written testimony for the record, please do so by emailing it to humanservices@dccouncil.us by close of business on Thursday, September 29th. The time is 3:00 p.m. and this hearing is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Thank you.